on Agile here.
Yeah, that's right. There've been a lot of changes, and I'll go over it in the PowerPoint that we'll talk in a second. But we'd like to have all the questions put into phase 1 as well, and so to just make it easier, so that it's all in one spot in the phase 1 channel. Yeah. Well, all right. So let me sort of kick this off. So my name is Joe Doran. I'm an assistant professor at WPI in the Global School. I'll give a little bit more information about myself, my background in a little bit. But I just want to, you've all been interacting with me, some of the people who registered early. So we've had a nice back and forth as we've seen the numbers slowly climb from tens to dozens to hundreds, and now we actually just cracked 1,000 participants here in the Slack channel within the last 30 minutes. So to say that, I would love to be able to say that everything went as smoothly as I had planned that it would. I think we did a pretty good job for most of you getting you on without much hassle. I know that some people did experience some issues, and for that I really apologize. What you'll also notice is that I've been making changes pretty regularly to the way that the information is organized on the Slack channel. And I just want to give you a quick sort of explanation as to why that's happening. I'm actually responding to the way that you're using Slack, and the language that you're using, and the sort of the culture that's emerging on the Slack platform as we're all engaging. And every time I see that something is not clear, that you have a lot of questions, I think about how I can design this to make it easier for your expectations. And so I'm confident that what I have now is better aligned with where you're hoping to see things and how you're hoping to engage with each other. But I definitely anticipate that as the week continues to move along, that there will be further changes to the layout and to some of the language. So with that said, I'll leave some of the more formal statements, the things about logistics, the way that the agenda for the week, and some of those other details for a few moments. But at the moment, I'd like to just take a second and introduce our provost, WPI professor and provost, Wally Sobiejo, who is a fellow Nigerian who's been working hard throughout, for years has been working hard to help develop capacity in Nigeria and across Africa, but who has also been working pretty tirelessly since the COVID-19 pandemic to help Africa and Africans like yourselves be able to better deal with some of the challenges that you confront. I'll now turn it over to Wally to more properly address you. And Wally, I'll get your slide deck up here in a second.
Okay. Thank you, Joe, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you all today from WPI. I deliberately put up this picture of WPI just to tell you a few things about WPI as an institution. So WPI was set up about 150 years ago around the idea of theory and practice. And so those two towers represent the towers of theory and practice that have guided the success of WPI as an institution since the very first industrial revolution. And what is special about WPI is that it's an institution that has made major impact in training people for work across 4 industrial revolutions. And so this notion of theory and practice is now blended with online education in a smart world of the 4th industrial revolution. And I think that what we're going to do in this training could be the beginning of a very special relationship between WPI and the community of folks at universities across Nigeria. I came here from Princeton 4 years ago because I believe very much in this way of educating people. And also because I found a community of scholars, teachers, staff, to be a community that wants to engage the world, especially in Africa. And so with that, I would also like to say that I spent 4 years serving at the African University of Science and Technology as the president of that university. And during that period, I met the folks at the NUC and NgREN, who really helped me tremendously during that period. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to continue this relationship with the NgREN and the NUC. So if you go to the next view, Glav. So like most of us, I think the advent of COVID-19 really caught us by surprise. And it's hard to imagine that just a few months ago, I really didn't know what was going on in China. I really didn't know much of COVID-19. But I made a trip to Ghana and Nigeria at the end of February, when I suddenly realized when I got to Ghana that there were serious concerns about COVID-19 in Africa. And then on the day I went to Nigeria, which was the 29th of February, that was the day we had the first case of COVID-19 in Nigeria. And as I walked through the airport, I suddenly realized that this is real. Somehow it struck me that this is real and this is serious. And within 2 weeks of my return to the US, I got back to the US on the 1st of March. Actually, WPI as an institution had to think about how do we close down and go into remote operations. So things moved very quickly from really not thinking about COVID to having to think about COVID. Now, when WPI made the decision to go remote, because we had already been doing online education, within 2 weeks, we were able to start delivering our educational mission to all of our students. And some of the people that will talk to you today will tell you that story. Deb Boucher and Katie Elms will tell you that story of how we went from sort of partly online with our graduate programs to all programs being online, including the labs, including the hands-on activities, including the projects. Everything went online in 2 weeks. And I would imagine for those of you that are listening across Nigeria and perhaps other parts of Africa, you start wondering, how can this be? And so we're going to share with you this approach that enabled us to go online within 2 weeks. And so I started thinking about this whole notion of how do Nigerian universities and perhaps African universities and school go online under the same kind of conditions? And what role can we play at WPI to facilitate this process? Next, please. So after those thoughts, I really then picked up the phone and I called up Joshua Atta and the team at NgREN of NUC to really start discussing the idea of having some kind of training program where we could share our own experience with going online with all the universities across Nigeria. And I really want to appreciate Joshua and the team of Peter, Obi, and Patricia for how they all came together around the idea and then worked out the logistics of how we make this training possible. Next, please. And then within the WPI community, I have to really thank the faculty and the staff for their commitment to this ideal. I especially want to thank Joe Dorian and Kerry West for organizing the program. And I'm really grateful to our dedicated faculty and staff for their support of this program. And as you can see, over the 5 days, we're really bringing you the key people that have made the online enterprise work at WPI to share with you really not just how we organize it, but talk to you about the pedagogy, the approach, the IT resources, and even how we use this as a way of training people in industry. And the way we're going to share this with you is with the hope that you can see the thinking and how you apply this in ways that will ultimately allow you to then extend these methods to other universities as well as your own within a Nigerian and African context. Next. So in many ways, if you look at the coronavirus, you can say, well, it's a challenge. But I also think that it could be a great opportunity. And It's a challenge, of course, because it's forced us to close our schools and offices, but it's also an opportunity because it could enable us to learn how to do new things in ways that could increase the impact of our universities on the communities around them. And that need, in my opinion, is really very significant at this time, where in the case of Nigeria, you have 200 million Nigerians, and you have 1.2 billion Africans, not million, billion Africans that need new thinking if we're going to think about how we can educate this. And you cannot do it just by having universities that do on site. And what makes the situation more urgent is that 70% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa is below the age of 30 years old, and they need education. And so if the universities become online on site, you have the opportunity to train not only the people within the confines of the walls of the university, but to use various online programs to train people around the communities in ways that can transform the future of work. Next. So what we're going to show you is then a world in which I call a coronavirus revolution transforms what is possible. It's a world in which every university becomes a center of lifelong online learning from cradle to grave. And within this context, all the universities in Nigeria and in Africa and in the world can train the trainers who train the teachers, who train the practitioners in different ways. And it doesn't all have to be degrees. It can be certificates. And the training can occur from the best trainers from across the world in ways that allow us to retrain not just the students, but the workforce that will meet the needs of industry. And through us and other universities, you have access to the online content and pedagogy that you need, such that you can organize this not just for training your students alone, but for training people to work for companies with the skills that they have. And by the way, that's exactly what WPI does. Our online training folks train not just our master's graduates, but they train people who work in industry to have the skills that they need to deliver their jobs. So what that means is that companies like Julius Berger or whoever that operate in Nigeria can no longer claim that our people don't have the skills when you have the industry training for online students. It also means that we can take all the 500,000 graduates from Nigerian universities every year and put them through these specialized training programs that will orient their training for work. And we could do all of this whilst we work at home across the world to create value for ourselves and the world. And so I call all of this the coronavirus revolution. And so it's not just training to get our universities open, but it's transforming our universities into these entities that can now use knowledge to transform the lives of our people using a 21st century world in which communication is facilitated online. Next. So to achieve this, what we're going to do is present a holistic approach. We want every university that takes part in this to know how you manage it, to know what the technology is that you use for this, to know what the pedagogy is that you use for this. We also want you to train people that are not just academics, but that are ready to work, which is what is special about the WPI approach. And so we're going to talk about how those pedagogies give the students the lifelong learning capabilities and the soft and the hard skills to succeed in the world. And we're going to introduce all the key components of online education to you, as well as the online technologies, online pedagogies, and ways in which you manage this and communicate in a way that will allow you to use those same resources and more to communicate with the world. And when we do all of this, we will also work with you on the implementation of the approaches that you develop at each one of your universities. So the groups of folks that represent the different universities can come together, and we will work with you as you develop your implementation plans. And of course, NgREN within Nigeria will convene and also support you with the IT backbone, with the pedagogy, with all the different components that you need to implement this vision across Nigeria and hopefully across African universities. Next. So I just want to go through now what to expect from this program. So this, of course, is the first phase of a 3-phase effort. The first phase is going to last 1 week. And so during this week, I will give this introduction, which I'm doing now. Joe Ryan will then follow through by talking about the training format and the logistics. And then Deb Boucher from the undergraduate online programs here, along with Katie Elms, will present to you how we responded in record time to the COVID challenge by bringing all of our undergraduate programs online. And she'll tell you a little bit also about how the university makes additional money from summer programs that are offered to the students in addition to our regular 9-month programs. All of these are online opportunities for our universities, and you'll have a chance to ask questions of Joe and Deb so that you get the necessary feedback that you need to formulate your own programs. Next. Then on day 2, we're going to present the learning management platforms and information technology tools. Joe again will do the introduction, and then Kate Beveridge and our tech team will also interact with you in detail, telling you about the learning management platforms and all the IT tools that they use to support our online efforts. And she again will be available to kind of answer your questions and help you frame these in a way that will hopefully be useful to you as you look at how you set up your own systems or perhaps improve them in the cases where you have those already working. Next, in day 3, we'll have Sia Najafi talk about software, virtual labs, and tools for online education. Sia will introduce you to a range of the software that you can have access to make your universities really rich in the kind of software support of the learning process as well as research. He'll talk also about the scientific help desk and then virtual tools that are really using cutting-edge new technology in virtual reality to create new platforms for doing experiments. And in the case of universities in Nigeria and in Africa, where we don't have all the money we need for physical labs, a lot of these ideas will provide credible new alternatives to enable us to really use the best-in-class technologies to support our teaching mission within Nigeria and within Africa as a whole. And Sia again will be available to answer your questions. On day 4, we're going to introduce online pedagogy, which is a rapidly growing and important field. This again will be introduced by Joe Ryan, but we will have specialists and experts that are scholarly experts in different aspects of online pedagogy and delivery talk to you. Sarah Stanlick, Chris Demetri, and Chris Wolby will introduce different areas of online pedagogy and how you need to think about these as you design your programs and as you implement them. We'll talk especially about project-based learning because this is one of the keys to really training people for the future of work. It's one of the hallmarks of WPI. And we would very much like to see you bring this on to ensure that we overcome the big challenge that we have where employers keep saying that our students, graduates from the Nigeria universities don't have the skills for work. And I think that by bringing on some of these pedagogical approaches, we can create a situation where really all Nigerian graduates will have the skills for work in ways that could be quite transformative. Next, please. And then on the last day, one of the most important aspects of this is how do you use the online platform to train people for industry? There are several companies that come to Nigeria and many parts of Africa that claim that they cannot hire our graduates because they don't have the right skills and preparation. In the United States, that's also a problem. But the way that industry solves the problem is to bring in our academic and corporate engagement section from WPI and other organizations such as that to train their staff at work. And this is an important component that can also benefit from online training, where you shape your curriculum to transform whatever employees you have into the knowledgeable and skilled employees that can do the work of industry. What that basically means is that every company that comes to Nigeria or Africa can use this method to train Africans to do the work. And in that way, we then start shaping the future for all our graduates by using these methods of online contact. And through us, you have access to all the modules we have, but you can also develop your own in ways that will make this a rich way for the universities to expand their impact with industry. So we're going to talk about how you shape the curriculum for industry, how you apply theory and practice to programming, improving the online program experience. When you're working with industry, you have to deliver quality, and you have to measure it. You also have to monitor the results in ways that give data-driven improvements and provide different kind of models for industry engagement. And this will be given by Mike Ahan, who is the director of that program. And he will be talking to you about how we can partner with you to really help you develop an industry outreach to companies around your different universities. Then on day 5, I will also be there to give some closing remarks and hopefully to have an interaction with you for the end of the first phase of this project. Next. So in this program, we have 3 phases. This first week is phase 1, which will just be telling you a little bit about how WPI does online and helping you hopefully to structure this holistic framework thinking. And then we're going to have phase 2, which will run through August, which will be an online institute that will really give you the deep knowledge of how you design online programs. So we'll go from program design, the structural design, to deeper level introduction to IT support, virtual tools, and even more in-depth sessions on project-based learning. And the whole idea we have here is that you then form teams that can then train other people at your institutions to deliver the online mission. So that's the crux of the training. This week will just give you a glimpse of what we do. Phase 2 will give you the depth of what we do to enable you to do this in your own institution. And every institution will be expected to organize itself into a project team that will then take the knowledge and insights you get and make a presentation at the end of phase 2 on how you're going to deliver the online programs to your own institution, or in the case of NgREN, how you're going to use this to coordinate the delivery across Nigeria. So ultimately, what we hope is that at the end of phase 2, you as institutions will be ready either to improve your existing programs or to build new ones that will get all the institutions to be able to be online from September of this year. And so in phase 3, what we at WPI will be doing will be supporting you as you implement this vision. And so we'll do this for the 9 months beyond to make sure that as you implement the program, we're there with you, helping to solve problems, helping to provide advice or connections that will help you achieve your goals. And so in summary, if you go to the next view graph, I just want to say that we're delighted to welcome you to phase 1 of this program. Our hope is to provide you with holistic insights that will really show you how we approach online at the undergraduate and graduate levels, as well as how we use this to train people that are in industry to have the skills they need for the future of work. And this is particularly important in Nigeria and in Africa, because I really believe that we have really smart people. And if we can provide these kinds of opportunities for learning, we can really transform the scene where every young person and every older person has the opportunity to use online to learn for life. So we'll present all aspects from pedagogy to IT, to computing, to virtual labs, to training for industry. And ultimately, what we want to do is to train the trainers who can go back to train more trainers, who ultimately would train the teachers, who will train the next generation. And so we look forward to working with you as you prepare your universities for reopening. Thank you very much. So you may wonder, why do I end by showing you a picture of two goats? So one of these goats is male and the other is female. But actually the goat is the mascot symbol of WPI, Gompe. And so it's just a way of giving you a WPI greeting, thanking you for working with us, and really looking forward to the days and weeks ahead. Thank you very much. Joe, you're muted.
Great. I guess you missed all of the eloquent things that I said while I was muted. So no, I just have to repeat them. No, thanks so much, Wally, and greatly appreciate it. So just a note to some of the folks on the team here on the WPI side, if you could also monitor the YouTube channel for comments. I think maybe Carrie and Sarah. I noticed that there's a lot of activity in the YouTube channel, so that would be great for us if there are questions that kind of come up that we could get into the Q&A session.
Okay.
We'd like to include them.
Guys, I have to go. Thanks very much for this. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Great. So with that said, Wally's introduction, he actually did a lot of the sort of heavy lifting for me. So I think I can keep my intro much shorter than I'd planned. But I just had prepared a few things, and some of these things are, as I said, what Wally went over. But I really have 4 goals. I'd like to just introduce myself, give you a little bit more of my background, as I'm going to be one of your major touch points throughout the 5-day period, and hopefully further in phase 2 and phase 3. Wally already talked about the agenda for the week. I have a couple of details that I'd like to go over with you. And then he also brought up about the agenda for today, but there's some logistics issues that I'd like to just touch base with you since we're all convening here. Just about checking in about Slack, and then how to ask questions in the Q&A session at the end. And then I just also want to urge you to continue to engage as you're doing and have been doing. So as I said, my name is Joe Doran. I'm an assistant professor in the Global Projects program. That means that I prepare students to go execute projects in different areas across the globe, primarily in the Middle East and Africa. I'm the director of the Namibia Project Center. And unfortunately, we're unable to go there this past spring due to COVID. But we were able to engage online, which was great preparation actually for managing you throughout this process, as well as to be able to give you some actual real life experience on what it's like to create from scratch courses in short order and then into an online environment. I'm also director of the United Arab Emirates Project Center. I work on special projects in the Middle East and Africa. And my background really is in education innovation globally. So I've done, in addition to studying it, my postdoc was in education innovation. My PhD was in education innovation. I've worked with education technology startups in the US, China, Africa, and the Middle East, and Europe, actually. And as well as doing higher education management consulting to leaders of institutions around the United States. In addition to that, I've actually managed several major university projects in Central Africa, West Central Africa. They were primarily in Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, and the Republic of Congo. And I'm also a Fulbrighter. I don't know if any of you out there are as well, but I say hello to you too. So that's who I am. Hopefully we can interact more throughout this week and get to know each other better. And I've seen that a number of you have already made introductions into the intros channel. I'd really urge you to continue to do so if you haven't. It's great to see the variety of disciplines and to kind of put a face and background to some of the names and handles that we're seeing within the growing Slack community. As Wally said, here's the agenda for phase 1 of this program, is that today we've got it's essentially an introduction to online education. That's with Deborah Boucher and contributions from Katie Elms. Tomorrow we have the learning management platforms and information technology tools with Kate Beveridge. And note that the time is different for tomorrow. We start 1 p.m. Your local time. And then on Wednesday, 1 p.m., software, virtual labs, and tools for online education with Sienna Jaffe. We have Thursday at 1 p.m. again, online pedagogy. And then Friday at 1 p.m., we'll close out the week with Mike Ahern in online education for industry. So we'll post this again into the Slack channels just so that everyone's clear on the time. So this is the, in fact, I'll post this slide specifically in the help desk. So this is the schedule. These are the times in your local time. And so just if you have any questions about any of it, feel free to give a shout. And so then here's the agenda for today, phase 1, day 1, or my desire to always abbreviate things, P1D1. So as you can see, we got through the introduction from Wally. We're getting through the introduction from me. We have Deborah and Katie making a presentation, and then followed up by the question and answer. And to talk a little bit about the logistics of all of this, as some of the questions are showing up even right now in the Slack channel, is that first of all, I'd like you all at some point, and again, I'll post this slide directly into the channel, but I would like you all to check to make sure that you see these channels, that you have access. Some people, for some reason, were not added specifically to the help desk channel. And so make sure that you see announcements, you have access to help desk, you have access to intros, you have access to the general channel, and then you have access to phase 1. And that'll all appear on the left-hand, if you're at your desktop, it'll be the left-hand side of the screen in purple. And if you're on your mobile, it'll just be in the main menu. You'll see that it says channels, and then underneath channels, it should list all of these. So if you don't have access to these, just send me a note and I will add you. It's really, what the major issue is that it's only a small number of you, which makes it very difficult to find you. So if you could let me know, I'll make the correction. So I think that's probably the better way for us to move forward. Okay, so that's all about the channels and sort of the layout. We talked about our agenda, both for today and for the week. You got to understand how this phase 1 fits into the larger vision with phases 1, 2, and 3. So I'd like to just draw your attention back to kind of a little nitty-gritty logistical detail, which is throughout this session, we'd really appreciate it if you could post your questions into the phase 1 channel. We've got 3 of us who are going to be monitoring the questions. And so we'll be paying attention, and then we will be asking those questions during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. I see that a number of you are using YouTube. That's great. We'll monitor YouTube too. So post your questions either in the Slack channel or in YouTube, and we will follow along and make sure that we ask those questions. And I just wanted to point out, I posted several polls on some of the Slack channels just to gauge just some of the minor things from the audience to see where you all were at. What was some of your experience with online learning and with instruction, and then also around class size. And so this is the current results. So if you haven't filled this out, please go to it, the Poll Everywhere poll that asks, have you ever taken a course online? And we see that currently it's at 68% of you are saying that you have taken on an online course before, while about 32% of you have not. We'll see how much that changes as more of you answer. But we had several hundred at my last check that have responded so far. And then, have you ever taught an online course before? 34% of you, and it's about the same number of you have responded to these questions. About 34% of you have said that you have taught, with 66% saying that, that you haven't. And here was the question about class size. So at WPI, we keep class sizes fairly low. And so just for our own, so that we can tweak some of the things that we say and the way that we present some of the information to you all, we wanted to understand what the class sizes that you were dealing with at your different institutions. And you can see, it's a pretty good range, with the max number being about what we're managing here in this Slack channel, between 1,000 to 2,000 students. So with that said, I would just encourage you to continue to engage online, ask those questions. If you have problems, please reach out in the help desk. And really looking forward to a great week. And I appreciate how, the sort of sense of community that is on display within the Slack channel. It's really amazing to see you people that are there engaging, fielding questions for your colleagues and providing information. So I really encourage you to continue doing that. And I'm just really thrilled about the information that Deb and Katie are about to present and the rest of the presentations for the week. So with that said, Deb and Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. We are so happy to be here this morning. Katie's going to be handling the slide deck, and we'll both be interacting this morning. So my name is Deborah Boucher. I'm the Director of Special Academic Programs here at WPI. I've been here a little over almost 4 summers. And my colleague Katie is the Director of Expanded Learning Opportunities, and a little further on in the presentation, she'll introduce herself and share some of the work that we've been doing together. So next slide, Katie. Perfect. So we're just going to start by talking about the overview of what we're going to talk about and our goals for this presentation. Next. So we want to just, we've organized this presentation around sort of what was our online undergraduate program at WPI like prior to COVID? Where were we? What did COVID-19 and that disruption do here? What were the experiences of both faculty, students, and staff? We like to describe the past few months as building a plane while it's flying, which is trying to build academic supports for students in collaboration with the amazing work that our faculty did to shift an entire university online in just a couple of weeks. And once we got through that initial our D term, our 7-week term that began in the middle of March and ended in May, we moved back into the world where I am most comfortable, which is our summer program. And our undergraduate summer program this year, it has always been a place for innovation and experimentation and discovery. And we'll share a lot of the things that we were doing prior to this. But this summer, it has really, that groundwork of innovation and of a space for innovation has really paid off, I think, for the university. And we'll talk a lot about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about where we're going. Just about 10 days ago, our president announced that we will be back on campus in the fall. Our plan is highly flexible. We're calling it TextFlex, and we don't have all the answers for that. Our faculty are working on that. We are trying to support them in every way we can. But we'll talk a little bit about sort of where we are now in light of the fall semester that is just around the corner. Next. So our goals for this this presentation include sort of the institutional. We want to talk a little bit about the institutional challenges of this very, very fast shift from a very traditional in-person hands-on learning school. We are known for a project-based learning. We are known for this work. Our faculty are experts at delivering this kind of in-person education, and our students came here for that purpose. And to suddenly see the institution move remote in a very short amount of time, we'll talk a little bit about the institutional challenges of that. But we also want to highlight the more specific challenges that our faculty faced and our students faced. And we also want to give you some interventions. So we created sort of a suite of interventions for our students online very, very quickly. And we've learned a lot in that process, and we want to share some of those things with you as well. Next. So I want to just give you a sense of what our online undergraduate program at WPI looked like prior to March of 2020. Next. So if you asked us where we have online education at WPI prior to March, we would have said there are two primary spaces that we are doing online education. We have graduate programs that are completely online, where students can earn a master's degree. We have corporate education that are online and hybrid and in person, but that is all really at the graduate level. So we have that going on, and that's really designed for highly motivated. Oh, I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. That's really designed for highly motivated working professionals, graduate education, and we understand that to fit into the sort of edge of the margins of people's lives, that they have jobs and families and careers that they are focused on, and they are making space for additional education beyond the undergraduate level. The only other space that we are offering online education prior to March of 2020 was in our summer term. So WPI runs on 7-week terms. We have A, B, C, and D term that happen in the fall and spring. And then in the summer, we offer 2 additional terms that are not part of the traditional academic year. These are we offer courses where students can pay to take a single course or a series of courses if they're interested in it. And these are both in person and online. And so about the graph that is on the screen right now sort of shows the shift that we have been making over the past 5 years, 5 or 6 years. So we predominantly had in-person courses that students were staying here in Worcester in the summertime and taking courses and maybe working on campus or working around town. And then we began to see a shift. We offered more online courses, and we saw students taking us up on additional online courses. And you can see that the red bar on the graph is our online courses. Last summer in 2019, we had almost 600 registrations online and 375 in person. So just almost 1,000 was our actual highest registrations ever was just over 1,000. And we were at about the same ratio. We were seeing about 1/3 of our classes and students on the ground in Worcester, and then about 2/3 were online and taking classes from lots of different places. And that is where all of our growth has come from. We've seen our summer courses, our summer enrollments grow. Almost all of the growth has happened in the online space. And it's something that we have been sort of intentionally building over time. Next slide. So we had a strategy in place to grow our summer enrollment, to raise visibility for our own students, to create a mindset where students were thinking about summer as part of their academic plan. We had an initiative in our last strategic plan called More and For, where we were encouraging students to get the most they could out of their time at WPI, to add more, add an additional major, add another minor, get everything you possibly can from your time with us. And we wanted summer to be a part of that strategy. We've been working with students to have them thinking about summer as part of their academic program. So always students think of fall and spring, but we wanted summer to become more a part of their planning, right? So they could take courses in the summer that would open up space in the academic year for them to take the internship or to do the other things that were important for their academic and career goals. And we are also really interested in working to try and build a community of learners. And so we've been working on developing strategies to support students online, to engage students online, to orient them online through an online orientation, through student success coaching. We've had some strategies that we've been putting in place and we were seeing that sort of incremental growth. On the other side of the coin, those are all focused at students. On the other side of the coin, we've really thought about summer as a place for innovation from a faculty and department perspective. We have small classes in the summer. We really have encouraged the departments and the faculty to consider offering a course that maybe they haven't offered before. Take some time in the summer to develop new things. We've seen we saw engineering faculty develop an engineering experimentation course that involved sending kits home to students who were online, so that they could practice in their home or in that virtual space and have the engagement, but be able to not be tied to the campus. And so that's an example of sort of trying this experiment and seeing, how does it work and how do students respond to it, and how could this work? How could we make this work going forward? Another example of innovation that we've been supporting in the summer has been on our math department. A few years ago, the assistant department head came to me and said, I really wish we had a way to really help faculty develop better online materials. Where we are providing great education, but the level of our materials just doesn't feel like it fits. And so together we developed a new model for a peer-reviewed lecture materials that faculty could use within the department to just raise their own online expertise. And we did that in pairs. We had faculty who were teaching courses and doing that work, and then another faculty would come alongside and work with them to strengthen those. And we did that over a couple-year period. And that's been really helpful. We've actually found that that's been incredibly helpful as we think about it the fall of this year. Next slide. So I want to just pause for a moment, and I want to just give you a moment to think about, where can your school build in space for experiments and innovation? What are some of the places that you could take small steps within a course or within a department? Where are some places that you could begin to collaborate with others on campus to just begin to build a culture of experimentation, where you can take a risk and try something new and not do what we've always done before? And so I hope you'll just take a moment and think about that as we move forward. Next slide. So that gets us to March 2020, COVID disruption. Click. So this is a picture of one of our math faculty teaching a course. It is clear that everyone is more than 6 feet from each other. This is the world before social distancing. Next slide. So the first thing I want to do is just talk for a moment about the difference between emergency remote teaching and online education. I think it's really important to recognize that online education, online learning is a well-researched and defined area of expertise. Joe talked a little bit about his expertise being in online learning. What we know is from the research is that effective online learning results in careful instruction and design and planning, and it uses a very systematic model for design and development. Emergency remote teaching, which is how we would define the shift that happened from in-person courses at WPI in March to online courses, is very different. It is temporary. The goal of emergency remote teaching is to it's a creative problem-solving solution, right? This is what we normally do. We can't do it that way right now, but we are going to shift this into an online space, and but with the expectation that we are only going to do this while there's a crisis, and we will come back to the classroom when that is over. It is an emergency response to maintaining access to instruction. And so in order to make this shift to emergency remote teaching, the entire campus just poured energy into supporting the faculty around, and really, I think the heroes of this story are our ATC, our Academic Technology Center folks, who you will hear from them later on this week. They really made things happen that you couldn't imagine, right? So how do you move an entire faculty online in 10 days? You have an incredibly gifted and talented group of humans who are committed to making it happen. They built workshops and support for technology, and they built getting online in a hurry Canvas, which is our LMS, that they built a repository of information for faculty. They offered an exhaustive number of workshops and office hours, and they just showed up and helped our faculty reimagine this very, very quickly with great energy. And then at the same time that was happening, at the same time our faculty was reimagining their entire curriculum, the entire rest of the campus was moving from our offices co-located on campus back home. And we were all suddenly in this world of Zoom without many of the resources that we rely on daily, without each other. And so all of the student services, all of the academic supports were suddenly online, and that created, it was possible. Who knew it was even possible? But it created a whole sense of challenges, right? So suddenly your academic advising office is doing academic advising remotely, and your career center is doing career advising remotely. There were so many things that we never thought about before. We had these systems in place to support students. But one of the things that we quickly understood as the reality of an entire university suddenly remote came into focus was that all of the shared learning spaces that students rely on were suddenly gone. So if you were to walk into our campus center on any given day in the academic year, you would see, dozens of students grabbing a cup of coffee and sitting at tables near each other, bumping into each other, having a conversation about a lecture that they just were in, struggling through problem sets and making, doing the work of learning in lots of spaces around campus. It happened in our campus center over lunch. It happened out on our back patio or on the lawn. It happened in the library. All of those things happened in all sorts of spaces on campus, and they were suddenly gone. And we began to think about, like, how do we support students in this remote space when so much of the web of the social web of learning was suddenly missing. Next slide. We had to begin to think about where does learning happen on a campus? And Dean Heinricher, the Dean of Undergraduate Studies, often says that although our faculty build great learning opportunities in the classroom and lecture and labs and all of those things, the real work of learning happens when you're in your dorm room wrestling over a problem set or having a conversation about a topic that just happened. That learning doesn't just happen in the classroom, it happens in all of these other spaces. We know that there's a whole body of research about how to support students online. We have in the United States, we have colleges that are really just focused at serving online students, and those colleges, the successful ones, have built entire support systems for students that involve intrusive advising, data-driven resources, and a really high touch. Because what happens online is students just can slip away. They show up one day and they show up another day, and then they slip away, and it's sometimes very hard to find them in a very different way that you might experience on campus. And so what we began to do was think through this challenge of a sudden disruption in education from a student perspective, and to really think about, like, what do students need here? None of our students had chosen to be online. They'd chosen in-person, highly practical education, not an online education. And so they were not necessarily prepared to suddenly be online and to think that they would be able to do that without some support. And so we began to put together a list of interventions to really think through, what do they need now, and how can we try and help meet some of those needs? Next slide. This is the part where we call it, we talk about building a plane as it's flying. So we began to brainstorm about this as the academic semester was beginning. So all of the energy had gone to getting everybody home, getting all of the faculty and students online. And once we sort of took a breath, we thought, okay, so what do students need? How are we going to build some supports for these students who suddenly find themselves online in a way that they didn't anticipate? Next slide. So we really thought about, how do we orient students to this remote learning? We saw multiple challenges. The faculty we felt like they had their hands full. They really were working so hard to shift their curriculum, to manage this new technology, and to just make this all work. We couldn't just assume that if students were struggling, that the faculty would have the resources to be able to sort of step in and help them too. It felt like one of those situations where we needed some additional support for students so that the faculty would be able to focus on the things that they needed to do. We knew that all of the student services and academic resources were available to students, and in a normal world would have been enough. But what we found was that the academic advisors needed to help the students register for the next academic term that happened. We were doing registration in April. Our career center was inundated with questions about how a sudden economic change was going to impact our graduating seniors or our rising seniors. And so there was a lot of work that was happening in these remote offices. We couldn't really say to folks who suddenly had even more work in a very disrupted situation, oh, and we need you to do these things too. So what we began to think about is how can we build some new interventions to support students? And we started by thinking, what do students lose in this new online space? They lose the structures of learning, right? So we teach them to go to the library to study, to not do it in their dorm because the library is built for studying and your dorm isn't. We teach them, we create spaces for collaboration. We have an innovation center on our campus where students are encouraged to gather in groups and do that collaborative learning. We lost the community support of everyone else is doing this too, right? The reality is when you're a college student and every other college student is cramming for a test or working through some difficult material, there are some norms there. Everybody's in it. And suddenly, if you're the only one studying at home and nobody really understands what you're doing, that can be a real loss. And I think that probably the most important thing is that we realize that learning is actually, it's a social activity. We learn in relationship to one another. We share information, we talk about it, we learn from what we say and what we hear. And so helping students sort of thinking through what students were losing helped us to come up with a set of their challenges. Next slide. So this is sort of our list of the challenges that we felt students were facing. We put at the top of the list is learning is hard work, always. It's always hard work. It is an active and engaged process. And it's best done within a social web of connections and support. And so, we build entire campuses to support learning. And suddenly all of that was gone. We knew that the disorientation and isolation of suddenly being in a remote context would be challenging for students. These students didn't choose this modality of learning. And all of the supports that they had built in their social webs, in their academic world were suddenly gone or more difficult to access. We knew that communication was going to be an issue. We experienced firsthand, like, where do we get information? How do we process information in the middle of a crisis? Where's that information coming from? When are we engaging with it? How, just because I read something 3 days ago doesn't mean I have the most accurate or most up-to-date information, as things are changing so very quickly. We were thinking about engagement and really thinking about the research that shows that students can struggle to engage in the online space. Schools that are serving undergraduates well online often have mentors or coaches to provide ongoing support for them to help keep them engaged and on task throughout the semester. We were thinking about social norms. We began to get some complaints from parents about how hard their students were working. I guarantee you that if a student were complaining to their hallmate, their answer wouldn't be, oh, that's so sad, you have too much work, right? The reality is, when everybody's studying and everybody's working that hard, there are some social norms that support that hard work that maybe don't happen in your mother's living room. We also knew that there were technology challenges, difficulties accessing things like high-speed internet, but also, we have students who are using our computer labs on campus in order to be able to do their work. And suddenly those things were missing. And we were also reading and thinking about access and equity and the implications of Zoom suddenly sharing the most intimate spaces of students' lives. Students relying on maybe not having a quiet place to study because their shared space was chaotic, or there were more people there than were manageable. And we also knew that students were finding themselves in caretaking situations that they would not have been had they been on campus, or they were managing complicated situations at home. And so we sort of took all of that, all of these challenges that we were seeing and hearing and reading about, and we put together sort of a goal of
I'm going to jump in here because it looks like Deborah has frozen. My name is Katie Elms, as Deborah mentioned, and I'm the Director of Expanded Learning Opportunities here at WPI in the Office of Undergraduate Studies. And as she was saying, that we put together a goal for ourselves to create a systematic approach to student success, which really provides that support that students need in the remote learning environment, that helps to identify students' needs, to figure out what it is that they might not even know the words to articulate, to say they need, because it's just such a hidden part of the everyday life of a full-time college in-person student, and encourage student engagement with each other, not only with staff and faculty, to start to recreate some of those bonds that students have, as Deborah mentioned, in places like the campus center or their dorm rooms, where they might be able to chat with each other about not just socializing, but actually about academic related topics. So how did we respond to the crisis? Kind of the big picture overview is that we first developed these student-facing interventions, which Deborah's sort of been hinting at right along. Really what we knew is, as she mentioned, we wanted to make sure that students didn't disappear without anyone noticing from the online space. When you have students in your classroom, especially if you're teaching in a smaller classroom, you are more likely to notice if someone suddenly isn't showing up, or if someone has been turning in work right along and suddenly you get nothing. It's easier to notice that. Additionally, even if you aren't noticing it, they're also showing up in other places on campus. Other people on campus are looking for them. And in an online learning situation, they don't necessarily have those same connections. It also was really important to us in developing these student-facing interventions that we have really strong relationships with students that let students know the campus might be closed, but the offices are not. We are here, we care, we see you, and we want to support you. We felt like it was important to have multiple spaces where students could come and see a human, even if that was across a computer screen, to let someone know if something wasn't going well. We also developed some behind the scenes interventions to support students if we thought that we both kind of proactively, of things we anticipated might occur, and trying to take steps before that happened for the general student body, but also some interventions that were a bit more in case someone was identified as not doing well or not showing up all of a sudden. And we really took a very specific approach that when we went into emergency remote online learning, we developed quickly while that plane was flying. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we took many of those elements and improved them and added additional pieces based on feedback from both students and faculty to support students in online environments over the summer. So our student-facing interventions. The first student-facing intervention we developed was a dedicated email address for online learning. We call ours virtual@wpi.edu. And what we really wanted to do was ensure that if a student had a question in an online environment, and again, remember, this was originally developed for the emergency remote teaching where students who had not chosen to be online were suddenly in this online space, that they could go kind of a one-stop shop and say, I'm having trouble with my technology, I'm having trouble with figuring out how to study, whatever it was that they were struggling with when it came to virtual learning. And our undergraduate studies team were the ones who received those emails. And we either connected those emails to our partners in our IT team, or if it was a registration issue, our registrar's office, or sometimes it was the student just needed to connect with another human outside of the actual class they were talking about, they were taking. And we could be that additional support, strategize some study habits. Do you have a special sign you put up when you're doing your studying and your work? And really making sure that that students just felt that they didn't have to jump email address to email address to email address for our different offices on campus when they went remote, that they could just go to one place. The next thing we did was we created a virtual learning support website that was dedicated at the time of emergency remote learning to strategies for learning online in the time of COVID. It was, again, a place that gave real tips and strategies, as well as connected to other resources that students normally would have found in other departments that they were comfortable with and familiar with on campus as they walked around to our different buildings. We'd also developed a weekly newsletter that we call our Just-in-Time Tips newsletter. And in this newsletter, what we do is we think about all of the information students need to learn about being successful and thriving in online learning. And we chunk it up into what they need for just that week. You know, what we heard from students, especially in the time of COVID-19 learning, was that they were just feeling overwhelmed, and all of the changes felt so overwhelmingly large that they sometimes didn't know where to start. So this just-in-time tips was important for if you can't think about anything else this week, here are some things to do to be successful in your class. It might be a reminder that midterms was coming up. So they wanted to book off some extra study time, as well as let people they were living with, maybe their family members, know that they were going to be having the midterm exams or final exams, and they would need extra quiet. Other times it was letting them know that registration for another term was going to be happening. Again, something they were getting other emails about as well, but this was this one-stop shopping place that if they couldn't think about anything else, they could come just to this email and see what are the top priorities they needed to consider this week as a student. And the last thing we did was think about how to have students check in with us. Obviously, you know, we encourage students throughout all of this to continue to develop strong relationships with their faculty. For any course-related questions, we try to push them right back to help them reach out to their professor, ask those questions of the professor. But we also recognize that our faculty were really working so hard to put all of their courses online, and that sometimes, especially if a student is struggling, it's really helpful to have someone who is just outside of the course to admit that I'm struggling or I'm not doing as well as I want, something that they might be embarrassed or ashamed to say to their professors who they admire and respect so much. We did this check-in in a couple of different ways. Some of the check-in occurred through the virtual@wpi.edu email address, But another was this thing called a community check-in. And it was a link in the Just in Time Tips newsletter that each week took students to a survey to answer a few basic questions of how they were doing. And we were fairly subtle. We didn't say, you know, what are you struggling with? We would say things like, give us a hashtag to describe the week for you. And sometimes it would be fun or related to something non-academic. But other times it gave us really useful information. It might be hashtag hard to study when the internet's not working. And this would be a clue to us that this student was struggling, even if they hadn't said anything in any other place and someone could follow up with them. Behind the scenes, we also had developed some different interventions for students. To begin with, we developed, in collaboration with our IT department, a report that basically scraped data from our online platform, Canvas, to identify students who were not either logging into their courses regularly, and then eventually for students who were not submitting assignments. And what this did was, we knew that it could be the data was wrong. It could be a professor had decided not to use that platform. It could be, though, that this was a sign a student was disengaging from the course. And so what we would do from there is we would reach out to the student, and we wouldn't let them know that the Canvas data had told us they weren't logging in and why weren't they logging in. Instead, our approach was to just check in and see how they were doing. We would send them an email telling them we were here. We're so glad that they're, you know, part of our WPI community. How's it going? How are your classes going? What's new? We also would accompany that email with a phone call to say a similar message. And from this information, we were able to, there were many students who said, oh, my professor's just not using this. But there were other students who, after a couple of emails, revealed something that was going on with them that was impacting their ability to do well in the course, that was particularly highlighted because we were in an online environment. And so we could support them in getting them to the right resources to address that. We also worked here to partner with faculty, where, you know, faculty have full-time loads in any time, especially when we were moving to this online emergency learning platform. And so we offered it as a space where a faculty member could email us if they felt students had just disappeared and stopped responding to their emails. And our team could do a little bit of additional work to investigate what might be going on. We could make those phone calls, because if a student is not engaging in emails, sometimes an additional email isn't enough. Sometimes it's the fact that they're having trouble with email, or they're having trouble with technology and they're not sure who to tell. So by picking up the phone and calling them, it's a different way to engage them. And then lastly, we also had this response to community check-in survey, where we had a question that said, if you need something, let us know and we'll answer. And we certainly responded to those. But we also responded to those quieter moments where a student let us know they weren't doing well, those hashtags or those answer to quick survey questions that just gave us a glimpse to say, something feels a little off here, I'm just going to check in. And the reality is, the worst that happens is a student is totally fine, but they got an extra email from another human from their institution to let them know that we're there and we care about them. So from all of this, kind of how we would capture what we learned was that, as Deborah mentioned, traditional online learning is truly designed for students with complex lives. She mentioned oftentimes these are students who are working full-time, are full-time caregivers, and are truly sneaking classes in around other things. Traditional online learning is highly structured, but autonomous and asynchronous and really driven by the students. And traditional online learning is chosen intentionally by students. Traditional students suddenly going online, what we learned is that, one, education was the center of their lives. So for our students suddenly in this online platform, They were all people where they might have had other responsibilities going on, but they wanted to be our full-time students. They wanted to take and dedicate time every day to learning. We also learned that because of this dedication full-time to learning, many of the students wanted synchronous meeting times with faculty members to have that same face time that they were missing not being together as a community in person. At the same time, we also knew that being home, students were also suddenly juggling other responsibilities. Some of our students had to work. Some of our students had childcare duties as their parents continued to work, but our K-12 schools were closed. So we really had to think carefully about this idea of how do we have this synchronized meeting time, but we also are making it available so if students suddenly have additional responsibilities, they're not missing out. We also had to keep reminding ourselves that they did not choose to be online, that we need to create these additional support elements and community feeling and help students learn how they intentionally could walk through the process of being a student going to class in this online remote space. That oftentimes, as Deborah mentioned, they might go to the campus center and have that coffee and start talking informally about a class. In their mind, though, they weren't necessarily intentionally doing that as part of their learning. And so when it was missing, they didn't necessarily know what to call it because they had never considered it part of their learning before, but it was a key piece. So at this moment, again, I just invite you to consider a couple questions. And if you have paper in front of you, I encourage you to just jot down a couple thoughts. So the first question, which is, what kind of teaching experiences do your faculty need in an online space? And the second question is very similar to that, but student-centered. What kinds of learning experiences do your students need in an online space? And I hope that you take some time to just jot down some ideas, especially considering both the idea that students aren't necessarily aware of academic learning that takes place outside of the classroom or the processing of that learning, and the fact that we are juggling, both faculty being at home with their families and students being at home with other responsibilities. So moving on to talk about our summer, where we had a chance to do what we're calling virtual 2.0 and refining many of these strategies.
Hey, Katie, I'm back, I think.
Great.
Speaking of technology challenges. So I'm going to just jump right in to talk a little bit more about the summer of 2020. So one of the very first, and I think most important things that WPI did this summer was we made the decision to drop the price of our summer classes. And we viewed this as a way to support our students and to support our families, to sort of recognize the challenges that they were facing. And so that shift, along with our decision to not reopen the campus and to shift all of our summer classes online, was a difficult decision to make. We were talking this morning about risk, and it felt like a very risky move, that we would force everybody online, and that we would lower the price. And yet that decision really was incredibly it was incredibly well received by our students and our families. They really felt like WPI cared about what was happening in their lives and really wanted to be there to support them by continuing education and by making it more affordable. At the same time that we did that, we reached out directly to our academic departments, and we said to them, we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know what the fall is going to bring, but we have this chance this summer to try and experiment with some new offerings, to take what we learned in D term in the spring and to refine it over the summer so that when we get to fall, we have a better handle on what is possible and how we want to be able to do that. And so we opened dozens of new academic courses in our summer term. We saw disciplines that we had never seen teach online before, our humanities folks, our social science folks, even our chemistry folks. So we're offering our chemistry courses for WPI incoming students this summer in ways that we never have before. But we've also really tried to be flexible and innovative in how are we going to do that. And so that work that we've been doing this summer has paid off. This is the next slide is one of my favorite. It is the slide that sort of sums up our experience of summer. This is not a COVID graph. This is an enrollment graph. And if you look closely, you can see about 6 years worth of summer enrollments. We've topped out at about 1,000 students, 1,000 registrations, I think I've said before. And this summer we are well over 2,400 registrations. We have closed classes. We've always had very small class sizes in the summer. It's actually one of our selling points. We've had to reopen new sections. We've closed classes. We just have seen such interest in our summer program this year. And so the results of that have been that we've given the faculty a chance to try some new material, to experiment with new technologies, and to really gain comfort around teaching online. We also saw students that we've never seen before. We've seen probably, I think, about 60 of our incoming freshman students, first year students who will start in late August as first year students, taking summer courses this summer. This is a challenge we've never had before. We have a whole host of challenges about inviting our incoming freshmen into classes this summer before they begin. But again, we just have seen students respond really well to this message, and it has been exciting to be a part of something that feels like we're preparing for an unknown future, that we are using all of our resources to support faculty and students in new ways. And so once we got through our emergency remote teaching experience, and we were sort of back in the solid ground of summer where everybody chose to be there, we continued to develop these interventions. And Katie will talk a little more about what these interventions are.
So I hope one of the things that's coming across here is that for us, while obviously the key role in any education are the classes, in so many ways, if we aren't finding ways to support our students and both help them to engage meaningfully with the content and feel a sense of community, academic community, sort of we run the risk of all of our hard work of developing high quality academic opportunities falling on sort of students who are just unable to fully benefit from those courses. And ultimately we risk losing them as learners in our universities, period. The other thing that we're very mindful of is that, especially as Deborah mentioned, in the summer, we've seen students coming in who we haven't seen before. And so when we're thinking about our incoming first year students, and even in D term, when we were thinking about our class of first year students at that point, these are all people who do not necessarily yet know how to be strong, independent learners. They're still developing their own sense of self, including sense of academic self. And really we need to provide, she mentioned intrusive advising at one point, and really for us what that involves is this idea that there are times when students need us to be a little bit pushy, kindly pushy, to say, hey, how are you doing? You said you'd send me that form. I don't think I've seen it yet. Do you think you could send it again? And obviously we hope that we eventually graduate them from needing that much support. But in the beginnings, in order to make sure that our education is accessible to all students, we need to have these structures in place where we're modeling how to be an independent learner and receive their high quality education. And these are skill sets that I would argue travel with students well beyond the university level into their careers, and can be very useful, for a much longer period of time. So as I spoke about earlier, we basically continued all of those interventions. We continued our newsletter, just-in-time tips. We continued our community check-in survey. We continued our zero activity Canvas report and did follow-up from there. And we continued partnering with faculty who were concerned about students. What we also did was we made an intentional shift. Originally, our information about virtual learning had lived connected to sort of this online emergency COVID-19 page. And we intentionally moved that from that space to our undergraduate studies space, as we really believe that we learned so much about things that were helpful to students that we want to continue to use these structures throughout other virtual learning supports, and really separate it that this information is here to support online students moving forward, period. The other thing that we added in was a summer orientation for students, and it was a very informal orientation. It was things like, it was really more of office hours, and it was a way for students to have questions about how virtual learning worked before classes actually began or right at the start of classes. And it was surprising the range of questions we received. I had one student who had been at WPI for a couple of years who came on, and the way he always paid his university bill was by going into our finance office and giving them a check. And he came in and said, I've never paid, I don't know how to pay for this in an online world. And so I was able to walk him through how to do that and get him connected to that finance office to reassure him this can all happen in a virtual space. We also got questions, they were having IT issues, or they just wanted to understand what the structure of this type of learning would be in this online class. How would faculty engage with them? How would they know when to do work and how to do work? And while we didn't have those answers and we often had to redirect them to faculty or other departments, we were able to hold that space of like, hey, I'm a human, I'm here. If you need something, you can follow up with me. We did add a couple new experiments to the summer. We had developed caseloads of students we were most concerned about not knowing the structures of online learning. And each week we reach out to those individuals. We send them an email, and then every other week we also make a phone call. And some of those students routinely just reply, oh, yep, thanks, I'm all set. But we do often also have students who say, yeah, I'm really struggling with this, or hey, I had this other question. And there have been a couple times where, because of the relationship we built, we had a faculty member reach out to us with concern about a particular student who happened to be on our caseloads, and we were able to just build right off that existing relationship to say, hey, what's going on? How can I help? In a way that was more deeply meaningful. We developed a faculty newsletter for our faculty that mirrored that just-in-time weekly information dissemination that our students receive. And in this faculty newsletter were things to consider for that week of learning that might be helpful, letting them know not only about tool, and we did this in collaboration with our Academic Technology Center. It let people know not only about different features that they might find particularly helpful in our online learning tools, but also things like the typical questions or concerns we see from students. Maybe it's about not having received feedback on grades yet, or wanting to give feedback to students for their learning, to faculty, I'm sorry, about the class and how things were going. And we could let faculty know that, hey, we're tending to see these types of things. This might be something you want to be aware about. The last thing we added was this idea of something we're calling a virtual online study hall. And again, it's another strategy to try to create some space in the online world for students to gather informally and chat while they do work or ask questions of each other. Again, replicating as close as we can to what we think about happening in that campus center over coffee. And we certainly have other ideas that we are thinking about as we move to the fall. You know, we're thinking about ways to work with our graduate student teaching assistants or our high achieving undergraduate learning assistants to continue to support online learning, so we build this network of community support as opposed to it all relying on, you know, just one office or just one individual.
Thank you, Katie. We are going to sort of shift into just a moment of talking about our plan moving forward. So our president has announced, as I said before, that we are moving forward with a plan to come back together on campus in the fall. What we know is that whatever plans we have to be very flexible. And so we're calling this Tech Flex. And so our faculty right now, hundreds of them, are working with instructional designers, our academic technology folks, and other folks that you will meet over the next few days, to think about how do we develop courses, how do we deliver courses in person, online, and in a hybrid blend for the various kinds of needs that we will have in the fall. If we can't fill our classroom, if we have to de-densify, that's a word I just learned, de-densify our classrooms, if we have to have limits on how many people can be together in these spaces, and we already have physical limits in terms of the classroom, what are some creative ways that we can meet this challenge? And so our faculty are working on that all summer long. They're using their summer courses, but we're also offering ongoing workshops, online workshops for the faculty they're called online pedagogy workshops. And I'm sure that the folks that will be coming in the next couple of days will talk more about the specifics of that. But really the idea behind it is to give faculty as many tools as we possibly can for them to be able to overcome the challenges that we're facing as an institution. This slide is incomplete, or this section of this presentation is incomplete, because we are literally learning what will happen as we go along. What we as an institution are doing is prioritizing small group learning and interactions, and reimagining learning spaces, and that will include online in ways that we have not used online before. And so we're excited, nervous. It feels like it's a time of real creativity and innovation, and we're looking forward to see what happens next. So we're coming to the end of our presentation. We just want to give you, again, just another couple of thoughts to consider. What steps are you curious about taking in this online space? Like, what actual steps? What things could you envision yourself or your institution doing? What steps could you be taking? And what kinds of supports would the faculty and students need to thrive in those steps? And I think one of the things that we know is that all change involves some level of risk, but it's also exciting, and it engages curiosity and creativity for both students and faculty. So there are a lot of things that I'm worried about right now, but I'm also excited about what's happening in our community around this challenge. And I hope that you are too. So thank you for joining us here today. We are happy to answer questions and have a conversation for a little bit longer. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. And just so to everyone that is out there listening right now, we're going to be entering into the question and answer portion of the session. So we're monitoring your activity on Slack channels and on YouTube. So if you have any questions for for our presenters, please feel free to go ahead and post them. Before I get to any of the questions that have been asked in the channel, it's just sort of an observation, and one of the things that I really like about the way that you presented all the work that you've done and you've talked about and positioned all the work that's to be done into the future, is that you really laid out a framework for sort of thinking through the problem and then the goal to be achieved, instead of going directly to the technology solution as the thing that solves everything. Do you think you can maybe talk a little bit about that type of approach, that process, and kind of how you engaged in that during the spring into the summer?
Yeah, no, I think that was very intentional for us. We are not technology people, we are people. We both come from humanities backgrounds, and so we saw this as a challenge of how do we connect, and how do we problem solve? How do we support students in this environment? How do we become part of the solution? And really breaking down the problem to be able to understand what were the actual challenges was, I think, the most important thing for us, because we didn't feel like more technology was going to solve anything. What we felt like we needed to do was understand what the challenges were and then work toward finding human connections to meet those challenges.
And I would just add that, I think we both operate from this mode of student-centered at the heart of everything we do. And what do students need in this moment? And when you come at these questions from that standpoint, it's a little bit easier to walk through the different things that students need, that any human needs, as you're thinking about the answer to these problems, instead of thinking of it just as an academic problem or a technology problem.
Yeah, that's great. And I think about it in my own, you're thinking about it across the institution and how you support students, meeting their needs inside and outside of courses. From my perspective and Sarah's perspective, and other WPI faculty thinking about the design, the approach is largely the same. It's how can you solve in this new context, which is at a distance, how can you solve to provide the same type of service and delivery of instruction at this distance with the technology tools that you have at hand. And so that just really resonated with me, the way that you kind of laid out that problem-solving approach. Sarah, do you have anything in that regard? Putting you on the spot. That's all right. We can come back to Sarah later. Great. So where is this comment? So I'm going to go into the feed here in phase one. So there was a comment here by Abdullahi Muhammad Magari, who said that students, particularly in Africa, see this form of learning as novel, a shift from traditional classroom to virtual. And many of them expect to see a better form of teaching that is easy to access and to understand. Is this sort of this kind of techno-optimism Was this something that you were faced with? How were different people responding across the institution as you were trying to move and make that transition from face-to-face to online? Was that techno-optimism sort of embedded in it, or were there real challenges and struggles once the rubber met the road?
I would say both. Right? So I think that there is a sense that especially traditional age students in a university setting are complete digital natives and don't need any support at all. And I think sometimes students feel like that, and I think sometimes the institution feels like that. I think the reality is that it's more complicated. It is always more complicated. And so engaging with a complicated university through only technology is challenging. And I think students really felt that. I think also what we heard from students was how hard it was to engage academically through just the technology, we all know how difficult Zooming is, right? How exhausting it can be to sort of be in this environment for long periods of time. And students really, I think, were surprised. I would say my sense was that students were surprised at how hard this was. Would you agree, Katie?
I would agree. I think, and I think it goes back in many ways to this concept Deborah talked about around students are learning in a totally different environment, often heavily influenced by people who might not also be students at the same time, with their own perception of how many hours one should spend on learning or what the best way to deliver content is. And one of the things we're really working towards is this high level of transparency across the institution, helping students understand that the work it takes for a faculty member to develop an online class or develop any class, some transparency around best practices in online learning and how it's not necessarily easier, it's just a different mode of learning. Because we did have students really kind of struggle with this wide range of connection with, wait, this is so much harder. But when you drill down, it wasn't actually that it was harder, it was just harder in the context in which they were experiencing it. Or students saying, oh, this is so much easier. And then you drill down a little and you realize, oh yeah, you haven't turned in a few assignments. Like we got to make sure we stay on top of this every week. So I think that really the more dialogue we have around what happens in learning spaces and how they occur, and then also provide these other academic learning spaces that are not in the classes where students can hear from each other that, oh wow, no, this was actually harder, or oh wow, this helped me a lot to master this concept, that the professor does not have every single answer spelled out on the online class can be really useful. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I was just going to say, I'm going to stop sharing, but if anyone needs our emails for follow-up, please do reach out. We're happy to answer any questions that way.
Great. I just want to follow up off of that because we actually have a comment from Christopher Oche, who points to a need to have a shift in mentality away from the traditional way of learning, and then discipline to develop self-study skills and follow through the learning process all through the period of engagement. And I think that's kind of along the lines of some of the things that you were bringing up, that some of the challenges that students were facing was that transition from on campus, being embedded in all of these systems, seeing people face to face. You show up in a location and it just kind of happens because everything is there, to being at home or in another setting, and the need to develop those that sort of the self-study, self-discipline in order to execute. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what happens on a college campus is designed for that, right? the ways that we that students gather, our dorms, all of these things are designed to foster that kind of atmosphere where it is perfectly normal to be talking about and working on these things, and in fact, you're a little out of step if you're not doing that hard work of learning. Once you sort of isolate someone from away from that, I think they're not aware of how much support they get from simply being in the soup on a campus, right? So being in relationship, in those social webs, being physically present in those spaces provides tremendous support for learning that they don't think about. And frankly, I don't think we have thought a lot about. These things have sort of developed over time. But this emergency, grand experiment has really, I know for us, it's made us think about these things different. And I think I hope we will see more thought going into what are the structures that students rely on and how can they be translated into an online learning space.
Yeah, and I think part of how we're getting at that answer is we're asking students for feedback. So this feedback piece is really critical to understand kind of from student perspectives what went well, but also from their perspective, what didn't go well. And sometimes we can change what they think didn't go well, and we can say, hey, we adjusted this, thanks for sharing, it wasn't working. And other times we can say, oh, they don't understand that this is an intentional design. And so let us be more explicit in saying that is actually this way for a reason. And here is why that is this way. That's really helpful. I would also say that having this idea of a weekly newsletter or some way to disseminate information weekly helps to, and with that survey for weekly feedback, even if students wanted, helps for this to start coming together in terms of maintaining momentum throughout an academic term or semester, and getting sort of that feedback live as well as intentionally at the end.
Yeah, that's great. You made me think of, through your comments there, you made me think of a number of different things from, it's almost like the co-creation. There's a co-creation going on with that engagement between faculty, staff, all of the people involved, and then students as well. Is that by creating enough of the structure and then encouraging two-way directional information flows, like you can start to shape the way that experience is for students, and that we take for granted, I think, the way that the physical space mediates that action, and you don't quite appreciate it until it's taken away from you.
Yeah,
so true.
So getting into here, there was a comment by, and I'm trying to find it. So you addressed part of it, but some of it was around types of assessment. Is that anything that you were involved with in terms of either getting feedback on assessment? We can think of, I guess, in terms of feedback in services. You could have it more broadly. So within courses, was this anything that you both engaged with in this transition to online?
Yeah, so one of the things that we had done for summer over the last few years is providing access for students and faculty to an online learning proctoring service. And it actually, so one of the first things we did was we said, here's a tool that faculty can use, because it was a real concern for faculty. How will we assess learning when we are used to having exams, and and how do we make sure that things are as they should be? And so we shared that information and supported that almost immediately. And, you know, online proctoring is online proctoring. It is a video camera. It is a little bit intrusive. It's a little, you know, depending on your personality, probably a little creepy to have somebody watching you take an exam. And so students really, we had some pushback from students around the online proctoring, and faculty heard that. Some faculty, you know, we didn't have a better solution, but they're working on better solutions. And I think that that is something that in the online pedagogy workshops, they're actively working on, because the students did not love that. Some didn't mind, others just really said that's more than I want to do. And so that is a challenge that our faculty are currently working their way through.
Yeah, that's great. And so Carrie and Sarah and anyone else who's on the line, did you have anything that you wanted to add to this discussion?
This is Sarah. I'm so sorry. I've been popping in and out as as the morning has gone along. I just wanted to point out that there's such an opportunity with the online learning to think about that assessment as both formative and summative. And I don't know that we always kind of think about process and product, but when we ask the students and have different reflective prompts throughout the time that we have together, it encourages their motivation. It makes them feel heard. It gives an opportunity for us to see what they might or might not be getting more informally. So whether it's planning for discussion forums or getting polls, just informal things that you can do to take the temperature along the way, it's such an opportunity that we don't often have in the normal classroom, in the face-to-face, because it can be just designed in kind of very naturally. So I want to underscore that for everybody as they're thinking about assessment as they move forward.
I think that's something that we've talked quite a bit about, and I so appreciate you sharing that. You know, we in our faculty newsletter, there has been a point where we have addressed this a bit, not only to think about assessment from different angles, but also to help students take hold of their own assessment of how they're doing and track their own progress, and have discussions with faculty about how they're doing. You know, it has definitely sparked this greater conversation around, you know, especially in larger classes, how do you take an integrated or project-based approach and incorporate that into assessment at times?
So Joe, I'll chime in a little bit here. Sure. I have been trying to monitor the questions that are coming up, and I'm sending them to you via email. So hopefully you're seeing those. I want to just get addressed as well. One thing that I just wanted to observe, and I hope that our audience is seeing this as well, is because I do see some questions where people are asking really specific about their scenarios, and that's understandable. But really just to observe that what we had to do was ad hoc and figure it out as we went along. And even just in the, you know, setting up this training, right? A lot of the work that Joe did over the weekend was really putting agile mentality into place, right? So we had it set up a certain way. We thought it was going to go a certain way. And then we got more information, and then we had to change as we went along. And I think that that is such a great example of the mindset that really needs to be embraced as you embark on this journey. And this is just like the very, very beginning, right, of the step of that journey. And I think it's where the world is headed, and we all know that we need to get there, and that each of you are going to have your own challenges, each of your students, each of your universities. I see, you know, questions about connectivity and about financial support and power, and like everyone's in a different spot. And these are all really, really important needs that have to be addressed. I don't know that we're going to have all of the answers to that, but we need to start the discussion. And so we will be addressing those issues and recognizing that they are really critical to have, and talking about, you know, what you can do from the perspective of your university and the resources that you do have available and the connections that you do have available in your communities and things like that to help you move down that path. So I just kind of wanted to draw attention to that.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. And I think I'd actually like to also add to that is that, you know, it really requires an entrepreneurial mindset. And so I know that's something that people in Nigeria have in spades with such a thriving entrepreneurial environment. So within a lot of the problems and issues that are being acknowledged, within the channel, and that, that we're bringing up as well, that we've faced, is also an opportunity to solve them. Yeah, so thanks for that. So we are a little bit over time right now. I just really want to thank both Katie and Deborah for their presentation. I'd like to encourage both of you, if you have the time, to engage in the Slack channel with any of the questions that are being directed at you, because there actually are a number of questions at the moment that are that are being directed directly to you. I'd like to ask, well, first of all, thank you all, the people that are joining. As we're seeing that the numbers were, it was between around 250 to 350 in and out of the video. But we know that more of you will be watching this at a later time. So I just would like to thank you, and then also encourage you to continue to ask your questions and engage in this dialogue. I'm just really excited about the next few days, and can't wait to further engage with all of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.